Okay, so now I'm going to have Evgeny join me up here, and we will have the opportunity to hear from him directly.
From other side? Can I?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, bon appetit. I decided to put two clips here together. One clip was about self-organization on Maidan, to show actually how people who came from different places, people who've been different ages, different social groups, different classes, different religious groups, came together and self-organized. And it was interesting because it was more as the title of the previous panel. And then I wanted to show what it was meaning for them Maidan. So that's why these two clips. And you know what, for me, it was interesting because Maidan showed unity. And when we're talking about propaganda and the cameras in these days, and I'm filmmaker, my weapon is camera these days. And you know what, and being filmmaker and hearing many times, I just did a movie about Syria where I heard 100 times from the people who were protesting since 2011 against Assad. They were saying, camera became our weapon. But it was on the same Maidan since 2013 also weapon. Because like it was mentioned before today, from the beginning of Maidan, a lot of TV outlets were belongs to different oligarchs, to different groups, so the media was controlled. And the only way to create this independence, to deliver the messages, to tell the truth what's happening on the square, was to create the independence outlets. And it was Spilna Bachenia, it was Espresso, it was Ukrstream, it was these independent branches of independent journalism, with the cell phones, with the streaming. And that's how, in our days, we can document something like this, we can deliver the messages, and we can engage people. And taking a step aside, I can go even this year, how during the Velvet Revolution in Armenia, they engaged the entire city to erupt and to go against Serge Sarkisian. They engaged the entire city, and in 40 days, they achieved what they achieved. Again, back to the unity, to the word unity. Now, what is the meaning of propaganda? Propaganda dividing us. Propaganda divided this country since 2016, or even earlier when they started interference in elections. Propaganda divided Syria. Why, for example, Syrians changed their flag? Because Assad used the demonstrations of the people and saw how he wants to turn it for his benefit, and he started to use these demonstrations on his TV and saying, no, they are supporting me. So they changed their flag back to the original flag of independence since the French left them and allowed them to be independent country. So it's interesting how in our days, camera more and more become a weapon. Talking about propaganda, talking about Russia Today, we spoke a lot about Russia Today. Actually, a week ago, Russia Today released a mini movie about me and about Christ from Syria, and I said, wow, that's success. It means Christ from Syria brought the truth, and right now I'm their enemy, and I've been enemy since Winter on Fire. You're actually seeing here Survivor in Canada, Jill. I was at Toronto, which we won with Winter on Fire. I was staying in the same 5-star hotel where Medvedev usually staying, and I was poisoned. And I was brought to the United States where doctors made a miracle. So Russia having their enemies, and I born in Russia. I been living in Israel from 91 till 99. Since 99, I moved to the United States where achieving my dreams and being filmmaker, and where I trying to bring the truth and change somebody's heart, change somebody's mind, and going back to Maidan and going back to the real award that I, as a filmmaker, thinking, I think that the unity of Maidan in these days living beyond the borders of Ukraine. In 2016, I got a lot of letters from Brazil when they told me that they used the Maidan movie, Winter on Fire, thanks to Netflix, that have it's everywhere, the biggest amount of eyes. I'm not doing advertisement for Netflix, but they're great. They made impeachment in Brazil because of this movie. It influenced the younger generation, the opposition, to make the impeachment. Then, in 2006, I think it's 16, 17, actually Venezuela erupted, and I saw pictures from the streets where Maidan movie was screened. I saw the shields and the cocktails that they were literally copying from the manual of the revolution that was created on Maidan Square. And it was like, wow, we're in Latin America, and that was Europe. And that's the unity of the people in a square. For me, it was a fascinating lesson that I never experienced before. Every human being was there, and they had a goal to change. It was said here, the people came out, they had a goal, they were all focused on one thing, to achieve the change. And these days, this movie working in Venezuela, I just spoke with the friends in Nicaragua that also told me that it's something that inspired them. Why I told you about Armenia? Because I heard the same stories from Armenia, that it was for them inspiration, and a lot of things the younger team that was operating during the Armenian thing learned from this Maidan event. So it's interesting how all over the sudden, filmmaking can change the history. And I will give you another fascinating example. Talking about media these days. Media living in a bubble. Why I know that? When I came to do a Syrian movie that actually also started my journey from Maidan. On Maidan Square, it was a Syrian flags, it was a lot of Syrian doctors who were studied previously in Ukraine. I don't know who knows these facts, but Russia had a very tight, former Soviet Union, had a very tight kind of situation with Syria. Since Brezhnev in 60s, when they helped to Hafez al-Assad to get to his power, actually Brezhnev said, we always will help our Syrian brothers and sisters. Yeah, they helped Hafez to get to the point where he was. So at the end of the day, it was a lot of educational points that the Syrian people were educated in the former Soviet Union and in Ukraine and in Belarus and in a lot of places. And it was interesting how the Maidan brought me to Syria at the end of the day. But going back to media, I want to give you some numbers right now. These days, because media a little bit focused on a certain angles, in the United States we live in on a bubble about our government right now. Nothing else coming. Walter, when you said that the journalists need to take more broad things, you know what? I will tell you something. It's not about journalists. Journalists are limited. You know why I call myself independent filmmaker? Because I'm not bounded by any network. I can go today and do a movie about Pope Francis, which I'm doing. Same time, I can go to Bangladesh, where I was literally a month and a half ago, and met with Rohingya refugees, and do whatever I want to do. That's allowed by my heart. I'm doing everything following my heart. But journalists sometimes bounded by the certain regulations. Even their independence bounded by certain regulations, because they know what story is important to their people. And you know what? If you're focusing on reforms, you will be focusing on reforms. And then everything else left for us, documentarian filmmakers. Icarus was done by my good friend Brian Fogel. You mentioned doping scandal. So Brian did this. I saw Brian last week in LA. So, you know, in 2015, when Luncheon was running for the Oscars, we had 124 movies running for the Oscar. In 2016, it was 138. Last year, when we were thinking to submit Cries, it was 170. So it's a progression that these days people do trust us as a filmmakers, because you know what, we're not blinded. We can go do research, meet with the people, learn about these people, same what I did with Maidan, learn exactly what's happening there and tell the story. Tell from the beginning, middle and end. Sometimes about journalism, you know what, you bounded by 2 minutes to tell the segment. And that's the problem. We can take a story and create from this a comprehensive story that can tell to the audience from the ground zero exactly what's happened. When we were creating Winter on Fire, it was interesting. When I brought the first rough cut, and it was called Pray for Ukraine, actually, a lot of questions were left out. And then we realized we need to create a movie like for dummies. Because unfortunately, in America, through Maidan period, it was 3 times segments on CNN, couple of segments on CBS. Rest was gone. So it means America not was exposed to Maidan. Same like America not exposed to many other issues these days. And I will give you a great sample. How many times during 1 year period you have a chemical attacks in Syria? We only learning usually about the springtime, 1 or 2. But it's almost every month. So media not thinking that it's sexy enough or commercial enough to put situation in Syria or about Rohingyas. And we are focused and we're living on a bubble. We're focused on the government. You know what, I'm getting breaking alerts from Hollywood about every day what Trump tweeting. Basically breaking alerts from the Hollywood media. So we focused on one certain subject, but we forgetting all what's happening outside. So this becoming a duty of us filmmakers, and we're trying to tell the stories. We're trying to bring stories from all over the world. I have a great journalist that was working with me on Syrian movie, Shahida Tulaganova. She's actually right now doing a movie on Rohingya refugees. And we were both in Bangladesh filming in the refugee camps. And it's important because somebody needs to tell this story. So I think these days we becoming this vehicle that brings the stories to the wide audience. Specifically, that these days you have a growing amount of different networks that are going through the internet, not bounded by any rules. Netflix, Hulu right now doing a lot of documentaries. They're buying because they need content. You have YouTube, you have Amazon, you have HBO. Yesterday I was with HBO because my last movie was with HBO. And you have more and more growing things. I have National Geographic interested in things. So it's growing and it's good because you know what? We can deliver stories to the audience that media not. So I think that was the answer to your question about broad things. I think it's important to also elevate the situation with propaganda in Russia Today and Sputnik. In last year, when the Oscars were literally months before Oscars, all media in the United States received a press release from the Syrian fighters supporting group. And it was saying, it was request to disqualify white helmets from the Oscars. You remember a short movie that won the Oscar? Orlando did it, a good friend who did Virunga before. So it was a request because they were putting A, filmmakers never been in Syria, B, it's Al-Qaeda. I was just accused in Al-Qaeda. I was called Al-Qaeda in Hollywood. I'm Jewish boy who, you know what, who been in Israel in serving Israeli military. Yeah, that's a fact. You can Google Russia Today and Sputnik. They're doing the huge campaign right now that I'm Al-Qaeda in Hollywood. Anyway, it's funny. So they tried to disqualify white helmets, and I got a call from LA Times editor, whom I met before, and he said, Evgeny, what do you think about this press release? And then I got a call from New York Times friends. And I said, guys, can you do some research? Can you Google who wrote this? And we started to Google. And where we got the news, the people who wrote on this campaign were all journalists from Sputnik. I said, okay, great, friends of Syria, Sputnik and Russia. So it's interesting how these days sometimes we're not trying to do research and see from where the source of the news. I have a lot of friends like this. We just stupidly reposting things on Facebook and then it's becoming fake news. We are the ones who creating fake news. Oleg actually said today that Contact, it's about your question, about Contact and Odnoklassniki. Odnoklassniki, it's a classmate. It's a Russian kind of 2 social network platforms. It's interesting. They were banned, but unfortunately everybody using Facebook. And Facebook became this kind of a vehicle of the propaganda these days. Even we're trying to limit things, but I have my personal friends who are reposting sometimes some news, but they're not looking that it was 2 years ago, 1 year ago, and they're not looking for the source. When I was doing a movie on Syria, I was taught by the same Shahida, who was working before for BBC, and then She was working for RFL, or Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty. She said, Evgeny, 10 times check the source. 10 times check the source. Then you will know if it's truth or not. And I will tell you another thing. When this movie happened, the movie that Russia Today did on me, the last segment of the movie happened actually at the Congress when I did a screening, and it was bipartisan screening that Boyle and Kinzinger did. It was bipartisan screening for the Syria. We pushed for the sanctions that House passed, and it's still in between. And by the end of the event in the Congress, we had a journalist that approached me and said, can I show you something? And he started to record, and I didn't know that he's a Russian, basically RT correspondent. And he started to show me something. And I said, wait, can I see the source? And he said, no, but you see, it's your characters with Al-Qaeda. I said, no, can I see the source? And then I'm seeing Russia Today, Ripley, Sputnik, and I'm like, no, it's not the truthful source. And he's like, no, but you see, it is video, it's truth. I said, no, but the source is the lying source. So it's interesting how important these days to educate people to go and check the source of the news. And okay, let's start with the questions.
I'm sure you could go on and on and on and on. Vinny, do you want to ask something? Yeah.
Evgeny, do you plan on doing a sequel to the
Ukrainian? Yeah. You know what? It's
movie, a perfect time to maybe deputize a group of documentarians like yourself to go and do a sequel.
Since I haven't been in Donetsk and Donbass, I can't do it, but I can support friends who've been on Maidan, who've been filmmakers, who doing these things right now. Same like I'm supporting, for example, Shahida, who doing Rohingyas. So I can support, and with my voice, I can bring the importance to the project. Yeah, I can do that, because I have access to HBO, I have access to Amazon, I have access to National Geographic, so that's not the problem, because I have credibility to my voice, and I have ability to bring it out right now. So yes, if somebody will approach me, and I know that some of my friends doing kind of, I call it Chapter 2, Fight for Freedom, because when I was asked about Maidan specifically, I said, that's the Chapter 1 Fight for Freedom for the Ukrainian nation. And everything what's happened later, it's Chapter 2 and Chapter 3 and Chapter 4.
Okay. I'm going to open it up for questions in a couple of minutes, but I'm going to take the liberty to ask you a couple of questions. So one of the things I think that I was struck by in the film and also in the ambassador's remarks last night is just the youth, you know, and the optimism of the youth. And I was struck by how young. I don't think there was a young boy who maybe was
Romka?
16, maybe 13. I don't know. He wasn't in this clip, but he was featured in the film. And, you know, really not just the youth, but the intergenerational movement. And, you know, Karen and I talk a lot about the intergenerational conversation here at the center, and it's something that we're really focused on. But it came out very clearly to me in the film and in our conversations today and last night about how generations have come together in Ukraine. And I wonder if you could just speak for a few minutes about that. And about what this younger generation is teaching perhaps older generations, and vice versa, what older generations who have obviously been around, have served in the military, you know, you saw them in the film, you know, teaching the youth how to defend themselves peacefully, how to build, you know, pop-up health centers and Red Cross hospitals. So, yeah, and then with that, you know, how is what you learned in Ukraine, you know, becoming somewhat of a blueprint for other youth movements? You mentioned Venezuela, but other youth movements across the world.
First of all of you just saw Anna's sentence. It's our country. It's our future. And I think for the youth who erupted in this revolution, they were thinking about them. Because everything what happened, it was about European integration. They wanted to be a part of the Europe. They don't want it to go backwards into the Russian, like generals today said, imperial kind of state of mind. They wanted to be a progressive European part and integrated themselves into this future. So I think the youth movements, they're more and more relevant to our days, and we can see the Parkland, what's happening in our United States right now, the Parkland movement. We can see in Armenia how it happens. But I think what we learned from Ukraine, it was the beauty that the younger generation erupted from the first days, and slowly, they brought also the older, they brought all the different social classes, and I think the beautiful thing that I never can imagine, and I was educated in Russia, where it was explained to me that rich and poor can't be standing in one place. They're usually fighting. That was the premises of the Marxism, Leninism, and everything for the revolution of 1917. But here, we saw rich and poor. We saw young and old. We saw almost every religious group with churches together. And that was the beauty of the unity that I wish a lot of places in the world can follow. You know what? Look at Israel. Jerusalem is a small place. You have a lot of different religious groups and the fights going on and on and on. And here we saw on the stage of Maidan almost every head of every confession next to each other, praying for one goal. That was the beauty. And that was the beauty of interface that right now basically it also inspires me to work with Pope Francis right now because he believes in interface. And I think all this collaboration taught the youth to be together. I think this unity is what allowed in 93 days achieve this thing. Mm-hmm. I think it's a great blueprint, and I guess, you know what, again, unity, something that we as Americans should know. We called the United States of America, but unfortunately we are not united. We are more and more divided, and again, Russia always used the simple thing, divide and conquer. That's what done to the European Union right now. When I was planning to do something on Spain, I learned that it was also with the help of a great brother from Russia, and so and so and so. So it's important to emphasize unity. And I think younger generation learned it fast. They were thinking about their future, and that's what helped them to achieve their goals.
Mm-hmm. And you talk, I mean, we've talked throughout the day, and you talked, just now in your remarks about, the misuse, the abuse, the weaponization of social media. But it seems like when we talked a little bit, before today about how social media was used for something positive in this situation in self-organizing the youth who were comfortable on social media. But do you see that, how do you see social media being used, in this situation to try to help fight the misinformation? And again, not just in Ukraine, but throughout the world.
Again, filtering things. So you need to go and see. You can't block things. In our days, one thing you need to remember, we do have freedom of speech in our country. And you know what, I always praising that me, as somebody who born in Russia, I praising my ability to be American. I'm American citizen for 10, 11 years already. And I'm praising this because for me, America gave me this chance to do things, to be vocal, and to tell the stories from all over the world. Something that I will be, if I was still in Russia, I not will be able to do. America gave me this ability to be a freedom fighter and a freedom speaker. Last November when I received the best director by the critics, TV critics, I said it, we are freedom fighters and we are freedom tellers. We're telling the stories from across the globe, and our chance right now is still high to hold this position, despite all what's happening in this country, despite the attacks on the media from our government. And again, I think you can't block things, but you need to filter things. You need to teach people to start to do research and not to be lazy, and to understand that there is sources and there is sources. Now, Russia today advanced themselves not only against, let's say, in Ukraine or in some places. I saw how Russia today influencing Arabic world. They're very strong in Arabic world these days, and people believe in this shit. It's a problem that Russia advancing themselves more and more and more. Trolling. I will give you a great sample. Nikki Haley posted something about Christ from Syria. It was last August, I think. And all over the sudden, hundreds and thousands of trolls were trolling her. And she took the tweet down. And I know that she was uncomfortable in that situation because she posted that this movie tells the story and the truth. And all of a sudden, trolls were trolling her account, and she took it down because she didn't want it, such kind of a following. So again, we as the people who are trying to educate the younger generation these days and the older generation. We need to emphasize that it is important to start to do research and not to be lazy before you're reposting something and before you're learning from some news. Is it fake news or real news?
It's hard. Last question, and then I'll open it up to the floor. But you know, Anna was featured in the film, and we've heard her speak here today. But have you kept in touch with the people who were featured in the documentary, and how have their lives changed?
Through Facebook, actually.
Through Facebook. See, that's an example of it being used for good, I think. But how have their lives changed? And you know, if they were to be featured in the second version of this film, what would that look like, and what would they say?
You know what? I will tell you something. I spoke with many of them after Maidan, then I spoke with them year after, 2 years after. Some of them were very hopeful at the beginning, then they lost hope, and then they learned to live with what it is right now. But like it was said today during the 2 panels, it is a progress. Mm-hmm. It can't happen overnight. There is a hope, and there is a progress ongoing. So again, they're living with that right now. They're hoping for the better future. There is a progress that, yes, Ukrainian people right now not having issue with the visa, they can go freely to Europe. So it is ability for the younger generation already to be more integrated into European community. So again, there is a pluses, there is a minuses. And again, it's an ongoing process. You can't change things overnight. It's not possible. It's not a miracle. It's not that somebody can take a magic stick and say, and it's done. Mm-hmm. I can do it in the movies, but unfortunately, in the reality of our world, it's not possible. Mm-hmm. So I guess time. Yeah, no, I think that's a theme we've heard, throughout the earlier panels today. But why don't I open it to you if you have questions? There's a mic coming around. Yep. Go ahead.
Can you speak about the role of nonviolence? I got a check, but I wonder if you can reflect on the difference between Syria and Ukraine and just the roles of groups that the fringes. I mean, think about the far right in the case of Ukraine, but also the kind of Islamist groups in Syria and how they've kind of taken advantage of maybe these kind of social movements, and how do you prevent that from going from nonviolence to violence and escalation?
Yeah, but you know what? In both of the cases, there is a similarity. I will tell you an interesting thing. In case of Ukraine, you had Titushki, who were released from the prisons and became the Titushki movement that were used again by the government either to provoke, either to do a dirty job. In 2011-12, Assad released from prisons 2 groups of prisoners. One were Al-Qaeda affiliated criminals who became later Jabhat al-Nusra, or some of them, Abu Muhammad al-Julani was until 2011, I think, in a prison in Syria. Then he was released, crossed the border, made a pledge to al-Baghdadi, head of ISIS, and became head of Jabhat al-Nusra. So it helped to destabilize the situation in Syria. This not happened in Ukraine. And the other heavy group that was released by Assad in 11-12 was the heavy criminals that became Shabiha, similar to Titushki, to do all dirty jobs. Because sometimes Assad was playing interesting thing with the kind of alloids, putting different minorities against majorities. And it's brought the more sectarian issues up. And when I was even talking to some of the activists, they didn't know who is right, who is wrong. So in all situations, the dictators, and I'm calling all of them dictators, Yanukovych dictator in that situation, or Assad, they trying to destabilize the situation, exactly what Putin doing right now in Ukraine, through all these kind of the war that was created, to destabilize the situation and, again, divide and conquer. Destabilization helps to conquer things, or to hold the position. In 2013, again, I'm going to politics right now, but I was accused that in the Syrian movie, never showed Obama talking about red line. But you know what? In 2013, if we were following the idea of red line, maybe we will not have all this kind of infrastructure of the terrorism going into Syria. And again, it's something that dictators using. Dictators using it big time. In 2016, when I was a lot in Turkey, I saw how Erdogan released a lot of kind of fundamentalists from his prisons allowing to put more journalists into these prisons. Same what exactly Assad did. He released a lot of criminals, creating the space for everybody who was in opposition. And it's not first time that he did it, because when Assad came to his power, I'm talking about the current president, Bashar al-Assad, he actually made a very tricky situation. He allowed to all opposition come out, because he said, we have a freedom, we have democracy, come out, let's talk. And he allowed them to come out to the streets, so he learned who is his enemies, and then he arrested them, he cleaned. So I think for every dictator, they at some point get into the violence, because it's to bring the fear. And violence is something that needed. If you go in even today to Armenia, where Serge Sarkisyan threatened Nicole, reminding him what happened in the previous revolution, it was a threat in front of the cameras. He threatened them with the violence. And they were lucky that, again, through the same social networks, they were mobilizing people. The beauty of Armenians think that nothing happened in terms of violent things, they mobilized through the social. They were organizing kind of flash mobs through the social media that allowed to erupt city and disturb the city. And that was actually a helpful tool. Again, we progressing and we learning. Social media, sometimes enemy, and sometimes a really helpful tool. Remember, Erdogan was hating social media, but it's only through the social media and through the actually FaceTime, he came to the entire nation against the coup. So it's interesting how these days dictators using this. But going back to your question about violence, you know what, some situations, again, I witnessed things in Ukraine, and it's terrifying how all over the sudden, like a snowball, it went into the heavy violence. But in the same time, in Syria, it's a 6 years war. And if in Ukraine, we've been helping them right now these days, in Syria, they were expecting that we will come, like in Libya and Tunis, and help them. When I came to shoot the movie, and they were already 4 years in, they said, why you want to do something about us? We were expecting Americans come and help us. And you know what? You not came. So why you right now wants to tell to Americans our story? I said, no, we not neglected you. We not abandoned you. It was the problem of the media. And I want to tell the story. So I want to bring the attention to your problem. I want to tell the story how it was. So it's interesting how sometimes the peaceful protest can become a violent. Because fear in Russia. Look, Putin holds his country with the fear. He came to the power with the fear, bringing the fear to the people. So I think for every dictator, the only ability to control is to bring fear on his own people. El Ghouta massacre in 2013 in August was to bring fear on his own people. Because basically the Free Syrian Army were standing in the gates of Damascus. El Ghouta is the suburb of Damascus. You can see his palace from there. So at the end of the day, the only break people, it was to bring massive fear. Why he using chemical weapon? Because he can easily use it, nobody condemning him for that. And Russia helping him. Russia developed chemical weapon. I had a conversation with General El-Saked, who was involved into that. And he said, Russia developed this, and then the person who developed this disappeared.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think we're going to take, is there any more questions? I think we're just out of time. We have time for one last one. Yep.
Oh.
And then.
I remember the incredible film that was made about Tahrir Square. I'm sure you remember that.
Yeah, Tahrir Square about the Egypt. It was called,
yes.
Square.
And it ends, of course, with the great, wonderful, they're going to make big changes. And I'm curious if you had, when you made Maidan, did that have any influence on you, or your Syrian film, actually?
You know what? For Syrian, yes, because the kids, again, younger generation, kids in Syria in 2011 were influenced by everything what's happened in Arab Spring. And actually, Tahrir was a part of Arab Spring. It was also younger people there. I know Karim and Johan, they are my friends, really, who did this movie. So I knew Tahrir in and out. And it actually was done exactly when the Maidan was happening. And actually, Tahrir Square situation was screened on Maidan. The movie Square was screened on Maidan. Yeah. So, yes, if we're talking about these things, it was screened on Maidan. For the Syrian situation, it was influencing, yes.
Okay. I think we are at time. Yep. Is there any? What? One more? Is there
By
any
shock
other
to all of you?
questions? We're good?
Yeah.
Yeah, you have one more?
Thanks, first of all, for exposing us to the film, which apparently was very unifying for the Ukrainian people. But I'd also like to sort of know the degree to which Russia tried to discredit the film, and also the degree to which the Russian Orthodox Church, because you talked about everybody being together there in Maidan, the degree to which they may have played along or not.
Okay. The answer is, exactly when Winter on Fire was growing with his attention to and the love and the awards, the Ukrainian guy by name Igor Lopatyonok, who lives right now in the United States, created the movie Ukraine in Fire. That, of course, misleading people immediately. You Googling Winter on Fire and you have a Ukraine in Fire. And, of course, Oliver Stone, who loves conspiracy theories, was brought in a mix. I had an argument with Oliver because we were like this. And they created completely different version to mislead people. That's one of the situations. I was accused in ton of these things. I was accused from the Oscar period. I had so much, again, dirty stuff and fake stuff, and it's their traditional thing. They not killed me, then it went through the media, then it was the movie to discredit, then it's kind of left over. In a second, I came with the cries from Syria, it started again. So they love this thing because, you know what? They need to bring something against you. They're trying to mislead people with these things. Now, about Russian church. You have Lavra. It's inside of Kiev. Actually, Titushki were receiving some of the help from inside of the Russian church there in Kiev. And that's what happened. So, yes, Russian church was trying to describe, kind of be on a bad side. And it's what exactly happened. And if you're following the news right now, since I'm doing a movie on a Pope, and I'm supposed to meet Bartolomeo, and he was with Kirill recently, the Orthodox Church trying to be on the side of Ukraine, and Kirill, who trying to be on top of the entire church these days, have a huge issue with Bartolomeo. So yes, you know what, the Russian church is kind of trying to do whatever is possible to kind of be inside, kind of sneak inside the situation.
Okay. All right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.